Jen, for those who haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
I am Jen Moulton. I'm president of CEimpact, and we are a continuing education company for pharmacists. And today we're talking about the business of lifelong learning.
All right, Jen, so I see your company and I see president. And I know at my pharmacy, there's some reasons when I'm supposed to say president and reasons when I'm supposed to say CEO and owner kind of thing. I forget all the legal reasons for that, but who actually owns CEimpact?
Yeah, so I actually own the company.
Why don't you put owner on there?
I think it's the way that I interact with my team. We're a remote team. We're a small organization. We have about 15 people. And I work alongside them. I call them a team and not really my employees or staff. I just feel like that fosters a better environment. And that's really important to us as a remote organization.
You're remote. Do you ever feel like you have to get together? Do you guys have I don't know. You probably have men working for you too. Do you have like a women's wine night or something like that?
Well, it's an interesting question. So, we sort of prided ourselves on this even before COVID. And it was a little bit difficult, honestly, because people didn't want to meet online when they found out that we weren't all in the same place. They're, a little bit confused by that. So that's actually been kind of a blessing of COVID for us as people understand our world now. We are actually meeting for the first time in a couple of months here as a full group. So I've met some of them, but there's people who've worked for me for almost 3 years now that I have never met in person. It sounds crazy, but we haven't had that opportunity to be at a live meeting or be together. And so we are all getting together in a couple of months. And then we have a leadership team. There's 3 of us on our leadership team. And we all agreed actually just this past summer that we had met quarterly. And now we're going to start to meet every other month. And none of us are in the same place. So it's a little bit difficult and expensive to do that, but it's really important for collaboration. I think it's easy to work remotely, but not easy to collaborate and really have some of those strategic discussions, which really need to happen when everybody's in the room. Yeah,
with COVID, it was like, I wondered what it was going to do long term. Like, would I be shaking people's hands, and this kind of stuff? It seems like almost all of that has come back. When you think about businesses, they can do it, but I think there's going to be almost like a cookie cutter approach that everybody's going to know this in a couple of years. We do this remotely, but when it comes to that, that's always in person, and it seems to me that no one quite knows right now, but I think that's going to get settled down where it's almost going to be an industry standard.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was just telling somebody the other day, I think the ideal is to be able to have meetings and collaborate and do strategic planning in person. But then when it comes to sort of heads down work, at least I personally do my best in my office, sort of without, distractions and that sort of thing. I think it would be hard for me anyway, personally, to go in the office a few days, out of the office a few days. For me, I have my setup and I can go fast when I have that set up. And if I had to, sort of re-establish that in a couple different places throughout the week, I think that would be a little bit tougher. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
So Jen, when you say you bought the company, what was the biggest asset of the company? Was it the computer program you were working on? Was it the professional networks that you had? Was there already a subscription base? When you think back, what was most valuable to buy? And is that the same as what would have been the toughest to build on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a couple things, really. I think who we were and sort of our reputation in the marketplace was really important. And then I think, too, the technology, although I hesitate on that a little bit because we sort of started from scratch. After I purchased it, we created a new learning management system. And that is valuable because it was expensive to do, but we sort of redid that. So I think it takes a while to establish yourself in the marketplace and get the reputation that you have. So I think that was really probably the most valuable. We did some things in education that really gave us a good reputation in terms of the quality of what we do and what we provide. And so I think that was really the biggest benefit.
I know you can't judge a book by its cover, but your website sure is nice. It's flashy, it's hip,
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's intentional. I feel like when I started in continuing education, that was one of the things that I really noticed is that CE was sort of old school. It just looked academic. It didn't look inviting. People had this check the box mentality because of that, because when they went into it, it was like, oh, I have to sit down and do CE. And so that was really intentional with what we wanted to do. We wanted a brand that was fresh and fun and innovative, not just in the way that it looks, but also in the way that we provide the education. So we have different ways of doing that. We have podcasts that you can get CE for. We have weekly emails that we send out, cases that are real quick to read on your phone. So that branding is really intentional. The other thing we noticed is that it was sort of clunky when you're in like a learning management system and, there's a lot of clicks and again, sort of old school. And so we really worked hard to try to kind of update that. And, it's expensive to keep up with the Amazons and those things, but, to try to at least, stay ahead of the game in terms of technology was definitely intentional.
There was a church that got a cease and desist or maybe sued. I think it was just a cease and desist a week ago or so because they took the musical Hamilton and they turned it into like a church service. Those things just like,
great.
They're cringy to me. I can't even watch some of that stuff because it's cringy. But you talk about breaking out a little bit. Are we going to see like a Shakespeare play with CE information or like a drama? It's like the CE is so boring to me. I'm doing it for the last 30 some years, whatever.
Right.
It's so boring. And it's like, remember like Schoolhouse Rock? Remember that?
Yeah.
I'm a Bill and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I want a CE like Schoolhouse Rock, and I need your company to be the one to do it. You already have a cool website. So can we bring some of that stuff on?
Yeah, well, sure. I'll have to give you credit for that if we decide to go that direction. It's an interesting question. And we've tried to sort of do this. We keep up on a lot of, learning technologies and, different things that people are doing. And if you remember, this is still a thing, but, back when they started with the avatars and, that was going to be the big, huge thing where you could put yourself into a pharmacy and sort of do that simulation. And, they had some of those sim labs and things, and those things are so expensive. So I think that was partly why it didn't catch on, but also because, at least for me, it's like when you're in a pharmacy all day and then you come home and, do you really want to sit on a computer and do that again? But, to your point, if it's sort of video game-ish, maybe that's more interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think there's a level of what can be done and, it's, the expense and all of that and how many people you're impacting as well. Pharmacy is only so big. So it's not like you have millions and millions of people that are accessing these things. But yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. And, we've tried to make it interesting and fun, within our budget, so to speak. So, like with the podcast, one of our goals is really to make learning a habit so that you're kind of constantly learning and, not saying that we're like, sticking it in like your vegetables and the brownies or anything, but, kind of trying to just sort of always be doing that so that you don't feel like you're sitting down to a boring 2-hour webinar that you have to, do to check the box. But it's, if you can pick up a case on your phone on a Friday and be like, oh, that's interesting. I just had a patient that, I needed to know that. So we're kind of trying to do that and make that learning in a habit rather than, you're right, to sit down and listen to a 2-hour webinar. That is the last thing that I want to do on a weekend. So we recognize that.
Because I think I'm first in line for people that have insomnia. If you look up on Google, my podcast is up on top. And then after that is probably CE.
Oh, I don't think so. Well, that's the other point, though. I think if it's something that you're interested in, it pulls you in. If it's CE just to get CE because you have to check the box, that's when it's boring because you're not engaged in it and you don't need to know it. So, that was really why we got really involved in CPD or continuing professional development in the early 2000s. I was really active in this. And the whole point was I heard from people, I don't like being a pharmacist anymore. I'm getting burnt out. It's not interesting to me. And it's like, well, if we can make that learning fun and applicable to your practice and, something that you can feel engaged in and as you learn, you implement that in your practice and you can kind of make that connection, I think everybody wins.
I think that's the key. What you mentioned there about, are you going to use it? And I'll put in that comment too. Have you remembered it? And it makes me think of Super Bowl ads, for example, where they say, which ad was the best ad? It's like, yeah, that's a big difference between best / memorable / what did it do for the product? Because you can remember a lot of stuff, but then it's kind of cliche. It's like, all right, great ad. What was it about? A lot of people don't know. And then even if they know what it's about, has their emotions been tickled to even do something with it? So I suppose my question in jest of making it more exciting, it's like, well, what does that mean though? Is it useful? That's the bigger question.
Yeah. And our mission is connecting learning to practice for that exact reason. Because I think, when I purchased the company, as an example, I don't have a business background. I got my pharmacy degree and I'm in continuing education and have done that for a lot of years, but I'd never owned a business. So I inundated myself with podcasts and webinars and went to conferences to learn about running a business. And so I was just soaking that up because it was interesting to me and I needed it. And I was implementing those things day to day. And so I think that's the same for pharmacy. If you can really find the stuff that is applicable to you and to your patients and to your practice, that's when it's interesting. And that's really what we're trying to do. Because, and it's frustrating to me when boards of pharmacy, as an example, will require CE in certain areas because they think that's going to have an impact. I call it the shoe bomber. Like when there was a big compounding issue, the answer was for the board to come back and require compounding CE. Well, not everybody compounds. Why should every licensed pharmacist in that state have CE on compounding? It doesn't make any sense.
Here's the problem with people in positions that they want to hold on to. The example I give is like being the custodian in charge of the indoor pool at the high school, where when you go to those high school pools, I mean, you can smell chlorine from like 3 miles away, and you go in, and you got to crack your suit out of your bag because it's all crusty and stuff like that from the chlorine. And if I was one of those custodians, the pool boy, I guess you could call him, in a high school aquatic center, I'm going to get in trouble if the pool's green. I'm not going to get in trouble, though, if I go with, 2 times the chlorine to kind of cover myself. And it's unfortunate in this world now, especially with the cancel culture, that most positions, you're better off playing it safe. And you see it across the board. And a lot of times you think that really no one suffers from playing it safe. But look at me. I don't swim as much as I want to. The quiet person goes away when everybody else is playing it safe. And so you're right with the CE. I think of, what the boards are mandating. It's like, what does that mean though, exactly?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's one thing they can control, and there are people that, you need to have the minimum bar be so high. So I understand that. But it is frustrating as a professional who, we should be guiding all that. And honestly, I think that's why there's some burnout, because we are so over-regulated, even in CE, that we don't control our own destiny. We're not controlling our own lifelong learning path. And so we're really, we're advocates of that. We want to walk with you on your lifelong learning path. And, that's really why we do what we do. And we're trying to provide enough out there so that you can kind of do your, what's important to you rather than, you just have to get this. It is frustrating, but I do understand it. There's got to be some minimums that we all aspire to, but I'm hoping that we all, truly, if we looked at the education that we get, it's, we're required to get 30 hours a year. I think I probably get at least 150. You're out there doing it. You're just not maybe recording it.
I don't.
Well, you're learning from these podcasts.
I get my 30 CE, but thinking about CEs, what constitutes a CE? How much latitude is there? For example, like this show, I've seen some shows turned into CE of various podcasts. The last thing I think I want is structure where I got to cover something because the guts of this show is going wherever we want to go. And I'd be concerned if I had to put it into a certain lane. But with my show, for example, or something that's not down the clinical heart of pharmacy. And that could be anything from business to psychology to some business outliers, marketing and sales and things like that. What constitutes a CE and who is in charge of that?
So you have to establish the need. There are 11 things. You have to write good learning objectives. You have to have good teaching materials. You have to give the participant an opportunity to evaluate it. You have to assess what they've learned. You have to allow them to assess what they've learned. So, there's a lot of things that make that up, and there are reasons for that. So what we say, we've been starting to do education that isn't necessarily accredited because, like I said, with your podcast, I listen to your podcast and I learn something new every time, at least, one thing during each episode. So we're constantly learning, but it's not always that accredited CE. So it's it's sort of a fine line that we walk. But I think the biggest thing is the non-commercialism. So here's a good example. We did a point of care testing course. We created that during COVID because that was something that pharmacists needed, pretty quickly. We had to create that. But then the companies that make those point of care tests are really the best people to educate the pharmacists on those because every test is a little bit different. It's hard for us to say, okay, here's 50 different tests, and then, here's how you do each one of them. So it's better for that company to come in and educate you on how to do that. They can't give CE for that, but because it's their product and, ultimately they want to sell you their product, but it's really good education and you need it to do your job.
All right. So those 11 make sense, or the ones I heard make sense, but I'm still missing, Jen. I'm assuming it has to be in a certain focus. I mean, it can't be on farm equipment. I didn't hear in there where the focus was. And what is that?
Sure. So there's a definition of continuing education that ACPE has. You can look it up on their website. And so it basically has to do with what we would do in pharmacy practice and sort of generally. So it can't really be something that's required for your job. So for example, you can't go through education to train on your new device, for example, or your new, your computer system that you utilize in your pharmacy, your dispensing system. That's something that you do on your job, but something that educates you as a pharmacist that you could then take to another job. So I like to think about it, everything that we learned in pharmacy school, 6-year-ish period of time. And then you have these 40 years that is your lifelong learning. And so it's an extension of that. So really anything that you would have learned in pharmacy school is considered continuing education. So if you could kind of put it in that context, you wouldn't have learned about farm equipment in pharmacy school. So anything that you would have learned while in school is part of that lifelong learning. So it can be clinical, it can be law, it can be patient safety, immunizations. I think there's like 8 or 10 categories now of that we, kind of group those into.
Would mine satisfy that or not? It's kind of, it's businessy. And would somebody who had a psychology thing of their employees or, a sales thing for the store floor, yes or no?
I think some of them would. The ones that I've listened to, some of them would, some of them wouldn't.
Who would look at something and say, you're not talking about medicine, but you're talking about something else? And I can understand maybe counseling. I get that stuff. Who makes a decision? And this is all just theoretical. I don't necessarily want to do this. It sounds like too much damn work. Who makes that decision to say, this is too far out? Let's say one of them is how to be considerate and patient with your customers that seem to have more mental challenges or have listening challenges or, like I say, some different psychology stuff or business stuff. Somebody is making that decision to say yay or nay. I know all the requirements, but who makes a decision and / how when it comes to things that are off the beaten path? I've been curious for my show, but like I say, that's not my intention, but I like listening to shows that are kind of out there a little bit, not too far out, but I can see that it touches my business some way. So who makes that decision?
As the provider, we do. So all accredited providers, ACPE basically every 7 years says, show me what you've done and prove to us that you're a good provider. And we have to go through this whole accreditation process, essentially. And so we then are given sort of the power to say yes or no. And so we have to tell ACPE we know what we're doing. These are the sorts of things that we do and why we do them. And so they have confidence then in us as a provider to accredit that.
And if you had outliers out there, too far out there, they might question that.
Yes. So there's a process where you can report to ACPE if you see something that shouldn't be CE. And then when you go up for that reaccreditation, if they see something that they're like, not sure about this, they'll kind of put you on, you have to submit an interim report and, go through all of this sort of re-questioning to make sure that they have trust in you, that you're doing the right things.
I imagine it's kind of a tightrope because you don't want to cross it on the negative side. On the positive side, you want to probably open up your repertoire to more interests and so on. And I would imagine that with the different accredited providers that you kind of watch each other, and it's like, oh, that guy did this, so maybe we can kind of go in that area. How many providers are there? How many accredited groups like yours are there?
That's a great question. Definitely over 100. I want to say, for some reason, I have like 120. 150 in my head. But there are people like associations, there are med ed companies similar to us, there's schools of pharmacy, hospitals, all of that. Yeah, and everybody kind of does it for a different reason. For example, a hospital wants to do in-service and grand rounds. So they'll be accredited so that they can provide that education internally to their teams and, meet some of their quality measures or, whatever their reason is.
In the past, we would see it where, Purdue or something like that, they'd have a official CE, accounted for CE. So they probably did enough stuff. They talked about enough different products. But then you'd see the sales guy there. Somehow they did the handling of the money, so it wasn't a direct payment. It was something. Are those still around, or are those getting clamped down on pretty well?
Yeah, those are really clamped down on. In the early 2000s, they really clamped down on those. And you saw I'll give you an example. The reason I even got interested in education was because I did a internship at Glaxo. And this is dating myself. So back then, Glaxo actually did CE. It was accredited CE. And then you saw, sort of 10 years after that, then it was like, you can't do that anymore. And you have to go, you have to get a grant for it, an educational grant. And then those got even a little stricter over time where you have to go on a website and you can't even say really what you're talking about. You just have to say like, these are the people we're going to talk about. This is in general what we're doing. And then the company would give you money and they call it an independent grant. So the company has a lot of rules about not being able to control that, any of the content. It's in my purview as a provider. And now I think we're seeing that even a step further, at least in the continuing education world. There's brand new standards this year that a rep for a company, even if you own stock in a pharmaceutical company, you can't serve as a speaker on a topic that would relate to a drug that they have. So they've gotten really strict about that. For a while there, we could use, as an example, like medical science liaisons with the companies. We could still use them as speakers because they were sort of a little bit removed, and we can't do that any longer. So that's pretty strict. And I think you're even seeing on the practice side, and I think a lot of organizations used COVID for this, but there's even clinics and hospitals that don't allow drug reps anymore. So even though that isn't, continuing education, they're not even allowing them to come in and educate their physicians or clinicians. So
they're going to carve that out now because a lot of them couldn't for COVID. And they're going to say, you see it across the board, people have switched hairdressers and everything. And they're going to do that for the reps because they probably really don't like them there a lot of times.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of work, but I do, you hear from providers that they like it. That's where they learn about their new drugs. So
really,
well, we're working with a couple organizations, and they said, we have to figure something out because our physicians are upset that, they're not going to get this education anymore. It's like, oh, there's so much education out there, but it was easy. The rep came to them, and so they didn't have to seek it out and, find continuing education on it as an example. So we have to figure out how we can make that easy for them to get, evidence-based, unbiased education in, the same way that they got that biased information.
What would happen if you woke up this morning and you found out that you were a high school science teacher and you don't know how the hell you got there? You just woke up and you were a high school science teacher. what feelings would be going through your head?
Well,
Because I hear education from you, and I'm just wondering, because I always thought I might want to be a teacher, and I end up like training my staff sometimes, like two of them in a row, and I get sick of hearing myself talk, believe it or not. It's the duplicate stuff. So what would your feelings be?
well, I'm in the same boat. I am not an educator per se. I like to lead the education. So I think, I think my sweet spot is really being able to put on the hat of the learner and say, how would I want this in new and different ways? My daughter's going to be a teacher as an example, and she's in college right now. She's a junior. And everything she's taking, I think that sounds terrible. I would be the worst teacher. I just would not be a good teacher. So what we do, and, sort of the way I started in education is I hired the experts. I like to say, like, here's what I want the end product to be. Brene Brown says this great, like, paint it done. Like, what should that look like? What do I want the learner to learn? But then to really develop the education and, use all of those best practices for educating, I am not the right person for that.
Do you have kind of a love for learning, or could you really be the president of anything?
Well, I do have a love for learning, and all the people on our team are lifelong learners. That's one of our requirements when we hire people. We all love to learn new things, and I think that contributes to us sort of being on the cutting edge as we're learning how other groups do things, and we think, oh, we could bring that to pharmacy education and, kind of spin it this way. So yeah, I think I could do other things, but, my real passion is pharmacy practice. I'm not sure I could bring that passion to another industry, but I'm definitely a lifelong learner, and I could do it if I needed to.
I went to one of the first NCPA pharmacy ownership training schools. It was back like 30 years ago. And I remember I hate group stuff, like where you gotta, now break off into groups. I hate that. Everybody hates that. But they made us break off. They'd say, if you were dropped in the middle of Alaska, how would you get out? And everybody did their individual thought process. Then they put a group of like 6 people together, and they said, now 6 of you work together, come up with something in 20 minutes. And across the board, everybody came up with better ideas from all 6 of them. I'm kind of a lone ranger now, besides the podcast. I'm kind of a lone ranger. I don't see a lot of pharmacists. It'd kind of be cool if CE could like force that, like force 6 of us into a Zoom or something and have this objective and come up with those ideas. It'd be neat to have some of that.
Yeah, we try to do some of that. We did a lot of it during COVID, honestly, because we just felt that need to connect. And we were hearing that from people, like they just really missed that. And through some of the virtual meetings that we did, we did some great virtual meetings where we'd have, exactly like that. Somebody would be in the room, and then we'd break off into small groups and kind of talk about a different case or something and bring that back. So technology is really cool that way, and that you can do that.
Did they get credit for that though?
Yeah, definitely. But it has to be structured. The education piece of it needs to be structured, and there has to be learning objectives. And, what are you trying to do with, breaking people into this case and that kind of thing.
Probably call it a live CE.
Yeah, definitely a live CE. Social learning, I think, is really important too. So we do some of that in the app where we'll, post questions about, in new immunization guidelines and, ask people to kind of weigh in. I love that. In business, I try to learn from what other people are doing. And, that's one of the reasons I love your podcast and learning about, different ways that people lead teams and, some of the creative things that they're doing. So yeah, I think it's great that we can all learn from each other. And I think we're going to see more of that.
What's the biggest threat to your business, whether it's competition or pharmacy boards or fickle consumers? What's the biggest threat to your business as you look out?
I think for us, there are competitors in the space. I know what differentiates us from that, but I do worry about pharmacists burnout, because I think with that, we're seeing people just don't care. They're like, I don't care about getting CE. They're starting to just not care. And we don't want to just throw CE out there that you like check the box and just get it done. Like, we want to engage people. I think that's how we all learn, and, all boats rise if we can learn together in ways that you just described. So I think, that's what worries me the most, is that people are just disengaged, because the more they're engaged, the more they want to learn and the more they want to improve. And that's really what gets us fired up and, and makes us to create great education. And if people don't want that, if they're not taking advantage of it, then we're not able to create it because we don't have a market for it. And then it just sort of gets, we don't want to create the stuff that's just check the box. That's boring for us. So as long as people stay engaged in the innovative stuff, that's what drives us and makes us be more innovative for them.
Devil's advocate. You have a captive audience because everybody who's a pharmacist has to get 30 hours and there might be disengagement, but unless there's so much disengagement that now they let their license lapse and they're out of the industry, it's a captive audience. So are you saying that there's so much disengagement that they're like, F the whole thing?
Well, I think there's a lot of CE out there that's just easy to check the box. And so what we do, maybe takes a little bit more effort or, people have to say, oh yeah, this is really good education. That's why I want yours over somebody else's that might be free, industry supported, just get it done kind of thing.
And what would you say the difference of a good CE versus not a good CE would be? Like if you had to sell somebody, you had 2 articles sitting there, what would you point out in yours that's different or better from run of the mill?
So we really make sure that every CE we provide connects learning to practice. So it's, you can learn, you can, memorize all the facts and get that knowledge-based education. But if you can't really apply that to help patients and to improve your practice or improve your business, then that really doesn't do you a lot of good. So everything that we do has to kind of have that. We sort of internally say it has to have that component where we say, okay, here's the 7 things you need to know right now.
Jen, out of your employees, how many did you say you work with?
We have about 15 people.
15. All right. I know those 15 are perfect and you're the perfect boss. But if you had that 16th person and they were no good and you had to fire them, why would that be? What kind of things are they doing or not doing that you have to fire them for?
Well, because we're remote, our team work and, the way that we collaborate together is really important. So I would say that they would be kind of a loner doing their own thing and not following the vision of what all of us are trying to work towards every day. Mm-hmm. That would probably be the biggest thing, short of, not doing their work, obviously.
Besides you looking at someone and, feeling they have the vision of the business and so on, what kind of production are you looking for? Is it a certain amount of articles? What would that output be?
Yeah, so we look at a lot of things. We actually follow the EOS process. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a entrepreneurial operating system. And it's great for people like me who, I'm a pharmacist, so kind of need that prescription, tell me exactly how to do it. So this was one of the best things for me when I first started the business. It's a book called Traction, and it literally sits on my desk. It's right here. I look at it all the time. But it really just sort of guides the way that your business should operate. And so, you have a mission and a vision, and you have kind of a scorecard and things that you look at on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis in order to guide you. And you have rocks every quarter. So like every 90 days, you have besides the day-to-day, there's certain things that, big things that you're working on that moves the company forward. So we sort of use that as sort of our guidepost. We follow the meeting structure. We have a all-team meeting every Tuesday morning, and it's just sort of a touch base on what everybody's working on and what, collaboration they need from other people and, the most important thing that week for them and how we can help. And then, we have meetings where our leadership team meets every quarter and looks at, what was our revenue? What was the profit? How many courses did we sell? How many people took the courses? What did they think of the courses? Are we meeting what the market needs from us? So that's really what we look at.
This is a big confession for me. I've never told anybody this before. But after I wake up, I'm listening to like an hour CE after I set my alarm to wake up like at minute 58. And then they give me all the questions. And I'm going to admit that all those people weren't as good as I said they were. I'm just going down the number 5s and filling them in so I can get this thing off my screen and get my credit. How do you get real feedback? And it's kind of similar to like a restaurant. They come over, it's like, how's your food? It's like, it's good. it's not always good, but I don't want to cause a scene and that kind of stuff. So I feel like they don't really want to know. How do you fight that?
Yeah. We call that survey fatigue, and a lot of people have it. You're going through and just checking the boxes. We look at comments. We do have some open fields in those evaluations, and if we're getting, good, not everybody comments, but if, the majority of the comments are positive, that's a good sign. We don't get a lot of negative comments, but when we do, we take those. And so, people might say, well, it's an N of 1. It is, but it's the way somebody felt. And so we do evaluate that and say, okay, is it an N of 1 or is there something that we could do to improve that? But I think the true marker is how many people utilize our courses, or, how many partners contact us and say, oh, I've heard of you. Everybody says you're great, or, whatever they say, that's a real testament. So we work with 80 schools of pharmacy and provide preceptor education. And we started just doing that in the state of Iowa for 2 people, and that has organically grown. We have really not sold that per se. So I think that's a great testimonial, to what we provide. So we really look at, how many people are taking our courses. We have a membership, so they can take everything or they can take nothing. But if people are taking a lot of courses, that tells me that they liked it and they're not just going through and saying, oh yeah, this is great, because they're going to take another one. And if they didn't think it was that great, they wouldn't take another one.
Pharmacists have always kind of worked on a membership thing. It's unspoken, but it's refills every month. And this is through pharmacy's history. Now the buzzword more is membership and subscriptions. A lot of people trying to do it. And, I'm even hearing now that the new cars, you have to pay a subscription for your key dongle for it to zap your car kind of stuff. Everybody wants a subscription. I would imagine that's an important part of the business is subscription.
Well, we actually just started this a couple of years ago. So we weren't that model, but I think it goes back to we want people to learn. And so we want to make it super easy for them. So that's the easiest way. We can give you all this stuff. We can just push it out to you and you can decide whether you do it or not.
Yep.
Yeah, not whether you can, pay $10 today to get that course. We don't want to make it hard for you to access it. And it also goes back to our business model of, not really just creating education based on a grant that we get. So, there are a lot of companies that will get a grant and then they develop the education. And so that can be made available for free. And we don't do that. We have costs associated with it. So from a cost standpoint, that's why. But from a learner standpoint, the true reason is because we just want to give you everything and make it easy. A lot of times, I'll listen to the podcast and maybe I don't get CE, maybe I do. It doesn't matter to me, but I'm constantly learning. And that's the important thing.
Some of it matters. How physically hard is it to do it? Because podcasts, when you say that you have extra CE, I'm thinking of being in line for a firing squad. And if this guy doesn't shoot me, the next guy's going to, it's they're all bad to me. And so I don't want to spend any time on them. But if it's a podcast or something, then yeah, I can see myself listening because you listen to podcasts without that need for credit. So a lot of it has to do with, your desires and how much something puts you out or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we try to do. So we have 4 different products that we just sort of push out to people, and then whatever resonates for them, great. If they might be on vacation this week and they're not going to listen to the podcast or look at the case, that we send via email, or it's not something that interests them because they don't have patients, maybe it's on oncology and, they don't necessarily need that. So I think it's just, but then I find myself listening to things that I wouldn't have. There was one on Lyme disease that we did maybe last year, it was a while ago, but I was like, I don't really need to know that. And then I listened to it, I'm like, super interesting. And then I saw it in the media and then I was able to, answer questions. So sometimes you don't know what you don't know or what you want to know. So I think the more we can, break down those barriers of, having to pay to do a Lyme disease CE, I'm never going to do that. But if I can just listen to it and learn something, that's really our goal.
I think that happens a lot. I know, especially since I've hit middle age and I'm on the downslope, I don't usually listen to a whole lot of stuff that I don't know about. I like reading a lot and watching YouTubes about space, the beginning of time, the universe and all that stuff. I love reading that stuff, but I kind of know it, but I like it because it confirms that I know this stuff. I'm on the right path. And so that's a tendency for me. I don't go too far out because it's like, I'm too old to learn that now. So when they do force me, or like you're saying, when it's readily available and it has some value to it, it doesn't hurt to even force us old guys into doing some stuff sometimes.
Yeah. If you just happen upon it. Yeah. I mean, we'll send out a case and, ask a question. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know the answer to that. And, I might open it up. I might not do the whole thing, but I'm, reading through it and learning something.
What's the worst hour of your week?
I would say, well, I look at our financials once a week, and that's that's sort of boring to me. I don't love it. I know I need to do it. And, when it's successful, then it is fun.
Well, boring's a lot better than anxious, though.
Yeah. I'm never really anxious. It's just the numbers and, having to delve into it. And, it's like, I want the fun stuff and the innovative, like, what education are we going to do next? Or talking to, our team members or our faculty members that we hire and, brainstorming, strategic planning, that sort of thing. I love all that. So it's when I have to sit down with the numbers and know I need to like accomplish that. I'm sort of more the visionary. So that's not as easy for me. So it makes me tired when I have to do things that I'm not that great at. And I have to try a little extra hard. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing.
What's your hardest emotion to deal with in your company?
I would say radical candor is probably my hardest. I don't know if that's an emotion, but I think the thing that nobody tells you when you own a business is the people is 90% of what you do. And even though we have fabulous people, if there's ever an issue that I have to deal with, that's hard for me. That's hard for me because I make it a point to know people, know about their personal lives. And, it's when you're sitting here paying the paychecks, it's really important to have a good rapport with everyone. Business ownership is not for the faint of heart. And I think that's what nobody really talks about is it is hard. You're responsible for a lot of lives. And that at the end of the day is really taxing. And particularly if it's not working out for some reason, because I know that people are trying their hardest. It just might not be the right fit for whatever reason. So yeah, that's tough.
Out of those 15 employees, how many is it their full-time job and how many is it like writing on the side kind of thing? Or doing whatever on the side?
In those 15 people, I don't even count the people that we hire to do our content. We do have some pharmacists on our team, and so we do some of the content. But for the most part, we want people that are in practice and living that day to day. So we hire those people. So I would say, though, out of our 15, we have about 3 that are contract. So we have a graphic designer, some people that do contractual work for us. We have a couple of students. So we have a media intern that does our media and some of that. We have another one that does some research for us. And then another one that's a student ambassador, that talks to other students at schools and, kind of relates to them. He's actually writing a blog right now. He's in his rotation year. So he's writing a blog every month, kind of like what that journey looks like. So it's really fun. So a few of those kind of people, but for the most part, everybody's full-time.
You got like 10 to 15 full-time employees.
Yeah. We've done the part-time thing. And, I think that's really hard, especially when you're remote. Everybody's working at different times and it's hard to schedule meetings and that sort of thing. So we try to either have full-time or contractual people.
What system do you use to kind of converse on all this?
We use a lot of collaboration tools. Asana is our we use that as really our communication and project management. And we do, I would say, the most work there. We communicate internally via Slack. So we try not to do internal emails unless it's a forward or, something like that. We use Toggle to track time. So we don't, necessarily say like, you didn't work 8 hours today. We trust people in that regard, but we utilize that to, run reports. How much time are we spending on creating education, that sort of thing. And then with our external faculty, because we do hire external people to write do a lot of our content, we use Basecamp. So that works really well. They can, upload their PowerPoints or upload articles and their CV and things like that. So those are our primary ones.
That's kind of a hobby, like looking up, the task management stuff. And I'm always trying out new stuff. And it's amazing how fast you can tell that something is not for you. You know, you can load it up, not giving it to your staff, but loading it up, and you could spend about 20 minutes on something and just say, it just doesn't feel right for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we did. We tried Monday. There's a few other ones that we tried along the way, and we just found this worked the best. So it's always a struggle to use it to the best of, our ability, because we're always trying to, how do we do that better? But, those are kind of our staples. We also use HubSpot as our CRM. So I would say that's another big one that, we use for like marketing and sales communication. We do a lot of that through HubSpot.
Do you have a social media one you use? Like I use Hootsuite. Do you have a conglomerate for that?
We have used Hootsuite. Currently, we're not right now. We have one person who's kind of responsible for that. And so she has sort of her processes. But yeah, we have used Hootsuite, and that seems to work really well. Yeah. We've been communicating, I would say really mostly through LinkedIn. We do a lot. And then because we have an app, we can do a lot of notifications through that as well. Yeah. So we try to stick to those. It can be hard, just you're all over the place. So
one of my brothers owns a is the president of a computer firm. He doesn't own it. He's the president of 100 some people. And their big thing is anytime something happens, because they've got to track all their hours. So anytime even an employee needs something from another employee, you got to fill out a ticket, so everything's monitored. And my brother, he said when he went in there, he said, one of the things I'm not doing is making a ticket out. When I need a plug in my desk done and someone's walking by, I'm not going to fill a ticket out. But then if things break down a little, you got to find a happy medium.
Well, that's probably one of the challenges I would say. And, is as you scale, they always say like when you add 5, at our stage, when you add a couple more people, like that takes different processes, so that's been something I've been a real student of, because we've grown from 5 to 10 to 15 people. And each of those is real different, growth requires different things. But we sort of pride ourselves on not having tickets. Even our customer service, comes right into a person, and, she's able to really handle most things, and, she can triage that, but we don't have a ticket process. And I know I loathe the day that we get that big. You want to get that big, but you don't want to get that big. So that's the struggle. Where's that sweet spot where you can still be, real hands-on, but make things happen too?
Speaking about goals and so on, as you kind of dream at night on a good day when everything's feeling good and you're lying in bed at night kind of saying how great things are, what is your dream for the business? How many people do you, and I know this isn't the monitor of that, but how many people do you think the business would work well with? In your heart, what are some of the goals?
Yeah. I would say, I've always thought like 25 to 30 people is a sweet spot. I mean, I've kind of got that chart, where I would add people and what more we need in order to grow. We have applied to be a provider for BPS, the Board of Pharmaceutical Specialties. There are only certain providers that can provide that CE as well. So we've applied to be one of those providers. So I am hopeful that happens, because I think we can make a real impact for those pharmacists. And I just, I'd love to be the go-to for people. I would love, when they hear about CEimpact, it's like, yes, that is the best quality education. It's easy. The user experience is easy. It's fun and fresh, and yeah, that would really be my goal. And really to be able to use the app in the way that we want to use it. We want people to learn from each other, whether you've been part of a listserv, there's some really great stuff there. So if we can connect people so that they can learn from each other, that's a real dream of ours as well.
The government comes in, and this is a day that we don't like the government, not a day where we like them. There's probably less of those that are mixed in there. But the government comes in and says, Jen, you are not allowed to do anything pharmacy or medical related with your structure that you have now. So you've got these 15 people. You're not allowed to do anything medical. And you've got to turn on a dime to make money for your company. What other industry would you flip to with your talents and maybe your infrastructure that wasn't medical?
Wow, it's hard to go outside that box. What I thought you were going to ask is if we couldn't have pharmacists or physicians as our customers. And then I was going to say, I would love to educate patients about what they should expect from the healthcare system and, do a mini pharmacy school or a mini medical school and give them the tools to advocate for their own healthcare so that they understand. We say around here, if you don't have a healthcare professional in your family, you're kind of screwed. I mean, if you don't have that person to go to ask a second opinion or say, how do I navigate this? Or I don't know how people do it that don't have those medical people in their families. So I would love to provide something to the public that helps them to better understand how to navigate that system and to give them resources in order to do that.
Totally hypothetical. Where would your revenue come from that?
I think that the revenue would probably come from people who want to educate. So pharmaceutical companies or, those sorts of groups that have a need for patients to better understand their healthcare.
And then maybe since it's not like board certified, they could, with full disclosure, they could slant something. They could spend more time on just this drug or something like that.
Yeah, I think I think you could definitely do some advertising, and you see that, once in a while, but I think it'd be great for it to come from a reputable source. So, again, there's so much information out there. What do you pay attention to? Oh, this is the best, lotion for skincare. Well, that's because you sell it, so it would be so great to have a non-biased group that's really providing that education to help people navigate the system. So I would stay, I know it wasn't your question, but I would stay in healthcare because I feel so passionate about that, but I would flip it and help patients to better understand.
All right. Well, now let's answer my question.
Well, let's see.
What other profession would be in the learning business? What other profession could be in there that wasn't medical?
Maybe teaching. What are innovative ways? I think teachers are they're valued by the people, like us as parents who, we know they're teaching our kids, but I think, undervalued in terms of dollars and, how they're paid. And so just giving them resources that help them to teach better, which they don't have to pay for, giving, if I could just do that and not have them have any monetary, commitment to that, I guess that would maybe be something. I don't know. That's a really tough question.
Teachers need a lot of that extra education too. I don't feel bad. My wife was a teacher, Jen, so don't get me going on that. They've got this great 9-month-a-year job and they're out at 3:00 every day. And my thought is that they have this teacher's lounge and they just have the best time in that teacher's lounge, but there's a sign, like Notre Dame football I don't know if you've seen it, but when the football players go out, they tap this sign. The teachers had this thing up there and it says, even though they had this great time, it says, remember to keep bitching. That's a sign that they go out and they tap it and then it works for all. And then they get, the school boards and the strikes and they get more money and all this stuff. It's like, they're just in that teacher's lounge. I've seen it at our school. They had, liquor and stuff in there. It's a great place to be. But when they walk out, it says, remember to not stop bitching. It's all a setup.
Yeah. Well, and maybe this is my optimistic, view of life, but if they, I think this is what happens in pharmacy too. We went to pharmacy school because we wanted to help patients. We were so excited about the opportunity to do that and to pass on that knowledge that we have to improve their healthcare. And I think teachers are the same way. They went to school. My daughter is a junior in college and she is Pollyanna about teaching. And I'm like, are you ready for this? This isn't what I'm hearing. But she is just so excited to make an impact on these kids. And then you just get into the job and it's a day after day. And so if we can provide resources to people that that keep that passion alive for why they did it in the first place, I think that would be super rewarding.
Seriously, it's not an easy job dealing with the kids. It's worse dealing with the parents. And they do have the stresses of having to have so many credit hours, like in 5 years, they have to get their master's or something like that. That would not be an easy path. And something like yours would be cool, if they could somehow, especially like with the online stuff of it, just make that an easier vision for those people that have a lot of requirements in their first few years.
Mm-hmm. Or, provide them with that resource of other teachers, giving them, cool and innovative ideas of things to do in their classroom. Or, it's just, I feel like that's what happened to me when I bought the business. I really started just absorbing everything I could about business. And, you own a business. When you're an owner, you are alone a lot of times. And, I think maybe those teachers can feel like that in a classroom. They're it. So if you can be supported by other people and, have people energizing you and, it's going to be okay. And, giving you ideas and helping to keep you positive and engaged, I think that just helps. We all look for that. We all need motivational stuff, every day to kind of keep us going, keep the compass.
In pharmacy, there's been some rocky roads, and we need the motivation to keep going. But when things get rocky, for me at least, helps to know that there's other pharmacists that are maybe going down a few feet in the water, bouncing up and down a little bit. Just helps to know that you're all kind of in the same boat. And that's where that connection helps also.
Yeah, I think so. And just to get some ideas about what you can do to change it, I mean, it's so hard to watch the profession right now. And, if you feel alone and like you're the only one dealing with it, that can make it worse. So I agree. We're kind of all need to feel that together. But, if we can use education in that way to continue to advance and innovate and, keep people learning and moving forward, I think hopefully we can impact that.
Well, Jen, pleasure meeting you. Great having you on. There's so much information that curation done by people that have the right focus is a real big thing. So thanks for what you're doing and keep it going.
Thank you. It was great to be here. And thanks so much for the invitation. And I would just encourage people to continue on their path to lifelong learning and just find a partner out there. Find somebody that you know and trust the education that they're providing, and keep up the good work to all the pharmacists out there. We're behind you. We're supporting you, whether it's through education or other things. I feel really strongly about the profession and know we're doing all the right stuff. So thanks again for having me. Love your podcast.
Thanks, Jen. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks.